The greatest mystery in history, a sacred ark that suddenly vanished from the world's sight forever. A ark that, just by touching it, would cause instant death. Flowing rivers would dry up before it, and the strongest city walls would crumble like a house of cards. But even more mysterious than its disappearance is how its truth can open our spiritual eyes today. If you watch this video to the end, I promise you will discover how the divine presence that the people of the Old Testament yearned for and feared is now with us today. This is a truth that will change your life forever. In fact, it was no ordinary ark or ordinary wooden box. Just imagine millions of people freed from Egyptian slavery wandering in a desolate and terrifying desert, and there, near Mount Sinai, God Himself gives Moses a heavenly map. No human being was designing this from their own mind. It was a blueprint straight from heaven. Acacia wood, the hardest and most incorruptible wood in the desert, was specially chosen for its construction. This wood was then overlaid with pure gold, both on the outside and inside. The wood represents humanity, and the pure gold represents God's glory and holiness. But the most special and sacred part of this ark was its lid, called the mercy seat or mercy linen. It was not made of wood, but entirely of pure gold, cast from the ground. At either end were two golden cherubim, or angels. Their wings were outstretched, and their faces were turned toward the lid, as if gazing intently at something great and holy. Interestingly, this was not merely a human creation. It was a reflection of the true throne of heaven, brought down to earth. Now, a question arises: why was this ark made? Did God, the creator of the universe, need a compartment to live in? Absolutely not. Heaven and earth cannot contain God. Instead, it was the very dwelling place of God's glory and presence on earth, a place where the most holy God descended among His people. Between those two cherubim, right above the mercy seat, God's glory resided as a wonderful light and cloud. This was called the Shekinah glory. This was the place where heaven and earth met, where God Himself spoke to His people. What was inside the ark? The two stone tablets on which God's 10 commandments were written, Aaron's dry rod, which had blossomed and grown almonds overnight, and a golden vessel containing the manna that God had rained down from heaven for His people. A profound spiritual mystery lay hidden here. On those stone tablets were God's strict laws, which loudly revealed humanity's sins and failures. If God had looked directly at that law, every person would have been consumed by judgment. But what stood between God's gaze and that law? The atonement cover, upon which the high priest sprinkled blood, to appease God's judgment and preserve His mercy. All this testified that God's holy word, His chosen priesthood, and His provision were ever present among His people. This ark was not merely a symbol or an idol. It was the very center of life and death. But the real secret is yet to be revealed: how this sacred presence became both a shield for the Israelites and a terrifying fire for the rebels. Just imagine it: an ark before which even the laws of nature bowed down. When the Israelites stood at the mouth of their promised land after a 40-year journey, the Jordan River was in full spate before them. It was a time of flood, and the waters were surging wildly, bursting the banks. But God's command was clear. The priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant and step into the waters of the tributary river. As soon as the priests' feet touched the water, curiously, no bridge was formed. No boats arrived. Instead, the water stood like a wall. The river stopped flowing for miles, and millions of people walked across on dry land. This was no miraculous magic. It was the very presence of God, making a way for His people. And then there were the strong and impenetrable walls of Jericho. History tells us that the walls were so wide that chariots could race on them. But God used no weapon to tear them down. For 7 days, the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant and silently marched around the walls. The Ark led the way, and the entire army followed. And on the 7th day, when the trumpets blew and the people shouted together, those huge and proud walls crumbled like dust in an instant. This was a manifestation of God's power that even enemies trembled at the sight of. Now a question arises: can this great presence of God and His holiness be taken lightly? Can any human being hold it in their fist? Indeed, the Israelites once made this grave mistake. They were fighting a war against the Philistines and were beginning to lose badly. Then they thought that if they could somehow get the Ark of the Covenant out of Siloam and bring it to the battlefield, they were sure they would win. They didn't ask God. They didn't repent of their sins. They tried to use the ark as some magical object. As a result, they lost the war. Thousands of their men were killed, and most terrifyingly, the Philistines stole the Ark of the Covenant. There was celebration in the Philistine camp. They thought their god, Dagon, had defeated the God of Israel. With great pride, they placed the ark in the temple of their god, Dagon, right next to his colossal statue. But just imagine, could the God who is Lord of heaven and earth be imprisoned in a temple built by man? The next morning, when the Philistines went to their temple, they saw the statue of their god, Dagon, lying face down on the ground in front of the Ark of the Covenant. It was as if she were prostrating herself before the box. He nervously stood her back up. But what happened the next morning shook them to their core. Dagon fell face down again, but this time his head and both hands were severed. Only his torso lay on the temple threshold. Not only this, terrible epidemics broke out in all the cities where the Philistines took the ark. Painful boils appeared on people's bodies. Entire cities were destroyed by rats. There was chaos everywhere. They realized that they had encountered a living and consuming God. Finally, in defeat, they had to send the ark back to Israel on a new ox cart, along with a gift of gold. Humans can never imprison God. His power and holiness are invincible. But the most horrifying part of this story is something else. An incident that reveals the true meaning of God's holiness. Years later, when King David made Jerusalem his capital, he decided to bring the Ark of the Covenant there with great celebration, music, and joy. Everything seemed magnificent. David placed the ark on a new ox cart and chose 2 men, Uzzah and Ahio, to drive it. Thousands of people were dancing and singing, but they had forgotten a very strict law of God. God had clearly stated that only priests from the tribe of Levi would carry the ark on their shoulders with poles. No human being would touch it. On the way, the oxen suddenly stumbled, and the ark began to sway. Uzzah immediately extended his hand to prevent the ark of God from falling to the ground. Perhaps his intentions were good. He simply wanted to prevent the ark from falling. But as soon as Uzzah's hand touched the most holy ark, God's wrath was kindled upon him, and Uzzah was killed instantly. The atmosphere of celebration turned to mourning and fear. David was so afraid that he refused to carry the ark that day. Why did this happen? Because, in God's eyes, no human dust or dirt is as impure as a sinful human hand. Uzzah had forgotten that God does not need human support. He can protect his holiness himself. God is love. He is merciful. But his holiness can never be compromised by humans. All these events testify to the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was a power that brought life and victory to those who obeyed. But it was also a consuming fire for sin and disobedience. But the true secret is yet to come. The ark that could dry up the Jordan River, that could topple impenetrable walls, and that could make idols crumble before it. Where did that ark suddenly disappear from the pages of history? What does that silence in Jerusalem say? Just think about that grand day when King Solomon built God's magnificent temple in Jerusalem. It was no ordinary building. Gold, precious stones, and the finest wood from all over the world were used in its construction. And in the innermost and most sacred part of that temple, called the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant was placed there with utmost respect and awe. As soon as the priests placed it there and came out, the Bible tells us that a cloud of God's glory filled the temple so powerfully that the priests could not even stand and serve. It was as if heaven had descended to earth. For years, for centuries, the ark remained safe there, in that dense darkness and silence, where only once a year did the high priest enter to receive the blood. But then came a fateful and terrible day in history that shook all of Israel. We are talking about 586 BC. Nebuchadnezzar, the cruel king of Babylon, attacked Jerusalem with his vast army. They broke down the city's strong walls, massacred the people, and set fire to God's beautiful temple. Everything was reduced to ashes. Now, a question arises. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant when the Babylonian army sacked the temple? The Bible's books of Kings and Chronicles provide a very long and detailed list of the loot. It mentions everything from the smallest gold bowl to fire, carrying vessels, tongs, and even huge bronze pillars. But curiously, the Ark of the Covenant is missing from that entire list. How did such a huge, heavy, and pure gold, gold-plated ark suddenly vanish into thin air? Did the Babylonian army break it and melt it down? If that were the case, they would have boasted that they had broken the throne of the great God of Israel and plundered its gold. But there is no mention of such a thing in their records. There is no record of this in history. So was the ark hidden somewhere safely? In fact, some ancient Jewish texts and legends hold that God warned the prophet Jeremiah of this terrible destruction long before the Babylonian army arrived. And with the help of some priests, he took the ark out and hid it in a secret cave on Mount Nebo, and then sealed the entrance to the cave forever so that no one would ever find it. Some even claim that during the time of King Solomon, the real ark was quietly transported to Ethiopia, and a fake ark, looking exactly the same, was placed in its place in the temple. They firmly believe that the ark is kept under heavy security in Aksum, an ancient church in Ethiopia, where no one except a specially appointed priest can even see it. Or is it true that even today, the ark has been buried for centuries, in a deep network of secret and dark tunnels beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, just waiting for the right moment and the right time? History is completely silent. Leading archaeologists, scientists, and search teams have been risking their lives for centuries to search for it, but no one has found anything, not even a clue. Why did God hide the ark from human sight forever? Perhaps because God knew the nature of the human mind. If the ark still existed on earth today, people would worship it like an idol. They would replace the living God with the golden box as their God. God's presence is not dependent on gold, silver, or wood. And interestingly, the last book of the Bible, Revelation, offers a completely different glimpse. When John receives a vision of heaven, he writes something astonishing. He says that God's temple in heaven was opened, and in his temple appeared the Ark of the Covenant. Was that golden ark on earth just a small part of a much greater reality to come? Was it merely a shadow of the real ark in heaven shown to Moses on Mount Sinai? But the real mystery is yet to come, when we learn how this missing ark and its profound mystery relate to your and my lives today. We will understand how the dreaded Ark of the Covenant of the Old Testament, which people trembled to approach, has become a gospel and a supreme hope for you today. Just think of the Old Testament high priest who, trembling only once a year, carried the blood of animals into the most holy place. He sprinkled the blood on the ark's atonement lid to forgive the people's sins. If he made a mistake, he would be killed there. God's presence was there, but there was also a terrifying distance. There was a heavy and thick veil that prevented ordinary people from drawing close to God. All this pointed to a coming great truth and a perfect sacrifice. Now a question arises: did God want to remain locked away from humans forever? Absolutely not. In fact, the real ark wasn't that golden box on earth. It was just a shadow. Interestingly, God's true plan was something else, hidden for centuries. When Jesus Christ died on the cross of Calvary and declared, "It is finished," a miracle occurred in the temple in Jerusalem that shook the entire universe. The heavy, thick curtain that covered the most holy place suddenly lifted up. It was torn in two, from the bottom up. No human being tore it. It was torn straight from heaven. There was no longer any distance. No human being needed to fear approaching that terrifying ark. The true Ark of the New Covenant and the lid of atonement became Jesus Christ himself. By shedding his own pure and unblemished blood, not that of animals, he gave us a direct path into God's presence forever. What that ark of wood and gold could not do, the blood of Christ accomplished. Today, the world's greatest explorers and scientists are searching for that golden ark in the caves of Ethiopia or the dark tunnels of Jerusalem. But they do not know that the real treasure has now been revealed to us all. Today, we don't need to look for a box or be afraid to approach it. God's glory, his infinite power, are what once resided within that box. He used to descend from above in the form of fire and clouds. Now he resides directly within us as the Holy Spirit. Just imagine, the God whom the boundaries of heaven and the entire universe cannot contain has made your heart and mine his holy abode. Our God is with us even today. He has never left us orphaned, in every moment and under every circumstance. The God who can walk before the Ark of the Covenant and divide the raging waters of the Jordan River, who can raise the impenetrable walls of Jericho to dust in an instant, can also help you overcome every daunting obstacle, every illness, and every impossible problem in your life today. You don't need to discover any hidden secrets. You just need to believe in Him, because the God who was yesterday is today and will be forever. That power of God is no longer confined to any temple.